I did. So this is my 3D time funnel. Here we are in the middle of the funnel, and there's the past, and it's not just a line, it's kind of dynamic. There's things happening in our past. We have all these memories crackling and effervescing, we call it. And we can go back to the past and we can change it as long as we get clear perspective. We heard Ms. Lou yesterday talk about clearing things. This is important. You have a question?
Is this what the Pleiadians are doing and other races?
I don't know anything about Pleiadians yet. I haven't taken that class yet.
Okay.
It's all right. How do we get perspective, the right perspective, and not get ourselves into a trap, a loop, what we call a script, where we're doing the same stupid mistake over and over and over again? You need an outside observer, or you need to be able to observe outside. It reminds me of the story of a couple who's sitting in a sidewalk cafe, which we were yesterday. But suppose there was a car wreck. Bang! Car crash happens. They get out of the car, the police show up there, take the driver's statements, and he looks around and sees us sitting at the table and comes over and says, "Hey, did you see the wreck?" Yeah, I saw the wreck. So he asked the guy, "What happened?" She was driving down the road and she dropped her lipstick in her coffee, crossed the center line, and bashed into his car. "And you, ma'am, what did you see?" "That's not what I saw. I saw him reading the paper, and he crossed the center line and hit her car." That's not getting anywhere for the cop, so he asked the store owner, "Do you have a surveillance camera that looks at this area?" "Oh, yeah, we do." "Well, let's go look at it." So the drivers and the witnesses and the cop and the owner all go back to the back room. They run back to TiVo and they play the tape. And sure enough, the woman did drop her lipstick in her coffee, and he was reading the paper, and they both crossed the line and they had their wreck. Now, everybody that's involved has an outside observer that's given them the straight and true answer, and they all go forward without any prejudice in their mind. That's when we're looking at the past. But what happens if we go to the past, our own past, and we change something? How does it feel in the present? Well, let's try it. This is my little time travel experiment. So I want you to go back with me to the house you lived in when you were 10 years old, as long as it's not traumatic for you. I mean, look at it from the street. You can tell what color it is, whether it's frame or brick or two-story or one-story, whether it has grass for a front yard or ivy or architectural stone, what cars are parked in the driveway, what toys might be in the yard. And you walk up to the front door and you knock on the door, and your 10-year-old self opens the door. And you invite yourself in. And you take your adult self back to the room to show your adult self your favorite dolls or your favorite models or books or puzzles or whatever you like at the time. And you walk around the house a little bit, just kind of reminiscing what things were like when you were 10 years old, and you come back to the front door. Your 10-year-old self opens the door, and you step out on the porch and you turn around, but before the door closes, you turn to your 10-year-old self and tell them something. Now you decide right at this moment what that is. Okay? Come back to the present. Some people feel a little shudder there, like, wow, I felt that come to me, to the present, that little message. I know what I told myself. It had something to do with matches, but it worked out. The cat lived. Everything was fine. We can do that all the time, and we can do it not in a sense that we're living in the past, but so we're observing the past, we're reflecting on the past, and we can then change the past and how we're affected by it. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be able to replace the finger that was cut off. Yeah. But it means you'll be able to change how you were affected by that. That was magic. Did you see that? I had so many different stuff. So let's get back to the time frame. So here we are. We're in ahead of the past. Our past is back there. And in front of us, we have the near future. Now, this is kind of a modification. This is why it's not just a straight, wide open cone formula. It's truncated a little bit because of the choices that we've made up to this time. Whether or not we went to college, whether or not we saved money, whether we took that job, whether we got married, had kids. I mean, a lot of decisions that we made set us where we are right now. It doesn't mean the whole rest of our life is messed up, because it isn't. Believe me, I had myself convinced by the time I was 40, you done screwed up. You're never gonna straighten this out. You're done. Just live out your life, and that's it. You're never gonna be what you wanna be. As I said on opening day, I didn't write my first book until I was 52 years old. August 17th, 2006, everything changed. I met the love of my life. I connected with self in a way I never disconnected again. I woke up. I remembered in large part who I am. And here I am 11 books later, and I have another one in the works. Because I just began at 52. Most people I know at 52 are like, I'm done, I'm finished. I'm 401k. I talked to a guy in my office the other day, 21 months, I have plans. You might die in 19 months, you don't know. Don't punctuate your life with paychecks or family vacations or retirement. Oh my gosh, retirement. I didn't retire, didn't I? Yes, okay. So out beyond that, then, is the potential of all potentiality, this wide open possibility. And really, I try to teach people that money is no object, and fear is no object. How would you like to be president of the United States at 71 years old? I know where I would be if I was a multi-billionaire with golf courses all over the world. Out of here, baby. I wouldn't take all that on for the world. But what we want to do is we want to put something out in the future, something we design. And when I ask people about what's your dream, I get the strangest answers. But for most of us, this pathway out there looks like this. I mean, we can see the path, but we can't see the path for the trees. We can see a little ways. And so we kind of go a little ways and we stop. We go a little ways and we stop. And how many of us have found a nice looking park bench along that path and just sat down for about 10 years? Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. But no, it's very real. So what I want to do is get on the other side of the forest and look back. I want to change where we come out of these woods. So it has to do with the golden mean. So this brings us to a very important component of understanding the universe, the golden mean. Now you kind of have a visual of the mathematics and the graphics of that. But what is it? The golden ratio of 1.618 is the proportion of energy that moves away from entropy. Not really in a violation of the second law of thermodynamics, but it's a proportion that's a result of dividing two consecutive numbers in a set. We do the length by the width. We get 1.618 to 1. You're familiar with this spiral, yes? Yes. And you're familiar with, you know that this spiral governs the shape of our face, the ratio of that. And also the sunflower that we've been talking about, and pine cones, and lots of other things in nature follow this. The periodic chart follows it, the layout of planets, the layout of galaxies, the layout of energy around any rotating body, and all bodies in space rotate, even conch shells. Everything lays out like that, including the human body. So what is this golden mean? How is it arrived at? Well, while I was teaching college mathematics, I had a lot of adults in my class one semester, and I thought, well, if I teach this section on Fibonacci, by the way, his original name was Leonardo da Piso, and he was a philosopher, but he was also a mathematician. And he taught that if you take three numbers, let's just say 0 and 1, and you add them together and you get 1, right? This is the beginning of what we call the Fibonacci sequence. And he realized that this kind of starts a process. So if we take the 1 and the 1 and we add them together, we get 2. This is pretty simple, isn't it? And you just keep following that iteration. And you get 1, 3, 5, 8, 13, and then you get to 21. What we're beginning to see is the instantaneous rate of change, or what we call the slope in mathematics, begins to lift off the runway. It begins to take off. And when we get to 34, an interesting thing happens. That rate of change begins to flatten out. It doesn't mean it becomes flat, but when we get to 55, it never changes again for infinity. It means that when we take 34 and we divide it into 55, we get 1.618 to 1. Now we've gone through a lot of numbers, and we started at nothing. We started at absolute zero, and we ended up at 1.618. Okay, end of lesson. Everybody answers 3 questions on the exam. In the brain, out the brain, they never use it again. So I said, I want to do it a little different. I want to discover something that is amazing about this. And so I decided to take 2 random numbers. What if we just took 2 numbers out of the cosmos? I picked, I think in the book I picked 75 and 216. One's odd, one's even, they're not divisible, and they don't know each other. They're totally unfamiliar with one another. We add them together, we get 291. Well, we've started our process. Here's our first 3 numbers. So let's continue the iterations. And here we go. We get to 8 iterations. We get to 8 iterations, we get to 5511 plus 3408, and we get 8919, right? Well, what happens when we divide those 2 together? Boom, 1.618 to 1. And I said, right, I'm going to go play the lottery. That was lucky. But it worked with decimals, it worked with fractions, it worked with imaginary numbers, it worked with functions, it worked with, even with linear equations. Every time I added these things together, I got the same result. So I said, well, if that's true, then it has to work with energy. You have to be able to take 2 energies and add them together to get a third energy, and take the second and third and get a fourth. It has to work with energy. You've got to be able to get on the golden mean. So when we went back and we look at this molecular model that I showed, I drew this in 3D so that you could see this more clearly. This is the smallest particle that we can make in the 3rd dimension. It has 4 sides. And that edge is the Planck length. This is the tiniest particle we can think of to get to this dimension. But we know this shape. In the metaphysics community, we understand this shape. We know exactly what it looks like. Don't we? It's the Merkaba. We see it all the time, this energy shape. So I said, these have got to be able to come together mathematically. And in our community, we're always searching for the theory of everything. How do we make the jump between quantum gravity and gravity, between consciousness and gravity? Where is the link? Of course, we tried with string theory. Remember, we were talking about holograms and frequencies and color, and so we came up with string theory. We went through a ton of grant money, and we came up with nothing. It didn't give us any answers at all. This isn't even on the exam anymore. And then 2.5 years ago, a strange experiment was done. We took that shape, that tetrahedron, and we started stacking them together. We did what was called particle stacking, using the tetrahedrons, packed them as close as we could together. At first, theoretically, and then we started doing it in reality. And this is the way it looks when we do it with graphics, and this is the way it looks when we do it in real life. So we started stacking these things together as tightly as we could, no space in between them if possible. And then we removed the field of the molecules, or the atoms, and we connected the center points, which we call point space. And Anthony Garrett Lisi, who is the physicist living in Hawaii, who came up with this. Once he came up with this diagram, this point space, he decided to connect all the centers together with vertices. And what he created was this, the E8 lattice. Now, many of you have never seen this. You'll see it in the book because it's in my latest edition. It's on the table. We want to take this E8 lattice, which you said the 8th dimension, and we want to convert it to the 3rd dimension, to the 4th dimension, 3rd dimension with time. And in order to do that, we have to divide this. So remember, I told you, in space, you don't divide things by cutting them in half. You divide them by taking the square root. And here's the weird thing. When we divided this, by the way, here's the formula for it. That won't be on the exam either, but you could take it with you and say, I saw the formula. When we divided this, they didn't turn out equal. They came out like this. And no matter how many times we ran it, it came out like this. But that's not the odd thing. The odd thing is the ratio. It was the origin of the golden mean. The golden ratio source was discovered. And this changed everything. Because now we know why it is, out of chaos of the universe, all these exploding stars and cosmic rays and high frequencies and low frequencies, why it is we're getting elements, why it is we're getting protons. And once a proton is created, it mixes with an electron, boom, you have hydrogen, which makes up the vast majority of the universe. My friends and I were sitting around a campfire one time. I'm not exactly sure if there was scotch involved, but there could have been. And we were pontificating on what are the odds of a carbon-based universe, of a universe like we have. And we had numbers etched in the sand way up there. I don't know, 10 to the 199. And then it came to me, oh my gosh, the odds are 1. They said, what? No, the odds are 1, it's 100%. This is the only kind of universe that can form because of the golden mean. If it's not for the golden mean, matter cannot materialize, and it won't stay materialized out of energy. And then we realized that it wasn't the dimensions that were infinite at all. It was the universes that were infinite. And then we actually may have connections between these universes. And the connections are pretty profound. Next level. Reaching, ever reaching into Nova Spawn, seeking knowledge, moving forward, back to memories home is. Pretty cool stuff. So on a smaller scale, this is all what happens to matter when sound hits it. You get this cymatic resonance that creates these shapes. But what happens when you, say, have an acoustic guitar in your room out of the box and you lean it up against the wall and you turn up your music really loud, and then all of a sudden one of the strings on that guitar, if I get this to play one more time, one of the strings on the guitar sounds like somebody just plucked it with a pick. In reality, what happened is the string actually absorbed energy out of the room. If you can measure that, that's called an absorbance peak. You'd be able to tell the exact note that made that energy. We can do the same thing with matter. And we're trying to do that in space. I told you about the laser interferometer gravitational wave observatories. Here's the one in Hanford on the left, the one in Louisiana on the right, and that's my Man Purple motorcycle in the lower left. But these tubes are 4 kilometers long. They're so long you can't see the end of it standing in the beginning. And what they do is they evacuate all the air out of these tubes, and they're at a right angle like a framing square. And then they shoot a laser down them to a mirror and bounce it back, and what they're trying to do is measure the length, the distance from the source to the mirror and back. 4 kilometers is a big Michelson-Morley interferometer. Theoretically, what should happen if a gravitational wave comes through our neck of the woods, that space-time should warp. And when it does, the pathway that the laser beam is going to follow should change, and you should get a signal. How does it work? Well, it works a little like this. We split that beam, and we run it down the tunnels to the mirrors. The light bounces back off the mirrors, comes back, and collides against itself. And we tune them to where they destructively interfere with one another and creates a zero signal. In other words, this is a giant framing square looking at space. one of them in Washington, one of them in Louisiana, we now have the ability to triangulate and locate that black hole should this gravitational wave originate. So when you combine these stacks, they cancel each other out. So when that energy is emanated in the blackness of space, it goes out and changes the integrity of the space-time fabric, and that's what changes the length of the laser beam. Now we're sitting up there in Hanford, Washington, we're talking to Fred Robb, who runs the facility up there, and he said the strangest thing to us. He said, you know, we're seeing particles pop into our dimension from another dimension. I said, what? This is a government-run facility. What did you say? He said, no, we're seeing particles pop into our dimension from another dimension. So really what we're seeing are universes communicating with each other, sending information back and forth with one another. And where do you think that information comes from? It comes from beings, conscious, sentient beings talking to one another. And maybe we're not listening. Maybe we should. What is the power of resonance? There's a simple experiment that's done with metronomes. 5 metronomes all tuned to the same frequency, sitting on a table. As you can see, they're random. But we can separate those from the table. We can give them, as it were, their own astral plane, where just the force of the metronomes is enough. And what will happen? In very short order, less than a minute, these metronomes will spontaneously synchronize. And they will begin moving the astral plane back and forth.
Do you think there's a relationship between the moon and the earthly cycle?
Could be. The point is we're astrally separated here, and now the power of the metronomes is the only power, and they're resonating with themselves. And we can prove this because we can take this right off of the cans, which is very low inertia. We'll call it meditation for now. We'll take it right back off its low inertia setting and set it back on the table. It's all resonating, everything's cool, and we'll put it right back on the table and watch what happens. No other vibrations, no other inputs, and all of a sudden, the metronomes become random again. Yeah, maybe we're not listening. Maybe the earth, our third dimension that we live in, is so noisy, it has so much inertia, that we can't let those very subtle energies resonate. And so what we want to learn is how to navigate that. How do you do that? Well, we're looking at a giant wormhole at the entrance. Remember the front end of that pathway through the woods, where do we go? And if we do walk in, how do we get back? I mean, I want to see my grandkids grow up, right? I don't want to just go out there and not come back. Well, we have a way. We did a lot of it yesterday. We were commenting on that earlier today, how yesterday was this day of meditation. It was kind of cool. It was kind of cool. It gave us a release, an ability to quiet the earth so we could listen to other forces. I liken it to taking the conscious mind, which is, we're here in this blue line, and we're going to separate our astral mind and we're going to connect it to our subconscious mind, way out there, way faster. It's a complex maneuver, but it can be done. So, the way I teach the meditation, I give people a launch point. So you have some sorts of navigation. This is my launch point in the book. It's my yellow terrace on a world far from here, 1,800 years ago. This was my view when the red sun was expanding before it took the planet out. By the way, this is what my hand looked like. I managed to look at my hand one day and say, that's got a little extra knuckle and an extra finger. But it was pretty cool. So I asked people, what is your dream, as I said before, and what's the answer I get most often? I want $1 million. I want $1 million. Well, why? I mean, what are you going to do with it? Put it in a bathtub and jump in? That's kind of freaky, but no, I want the $1 million because I want to buy a car. Ah, okay, so you really want the car, it's not the $1 million. You just think that you have to tell the universe how it's going to be done, and it's going to be done your way through the $1 million. Well, The universe might have another way of doing it. So I ask people, what's your dream? Because I want to get them to think about it, not as an end process, but as a beginning process. It's kind of like when you go to the beach to build a sandcastle. You don't go with a set of blueprints. You don't go with, I'm going to build this sandcastle that's going to be so high and so wide and be able to hold so many goldfish. No, it's just, I'm just going just to shovel sand and we'll see what happens. But what happens when it's done? Well, I mean, you walk away from it, jump on it, let the sea take it back. The point of life is not to finish the sandcastles. It's to be building the sandcastle. It's to be doing something. So I ask people to seek process and not seek the solids. The solids will come, or they won't. But I will tell you, I have a colleague, she is a life coach, and she was talking to an upper middle-aged woman who was a widow, and she couldn't find her purpose. She had money, her husband left her money, she just didn't feel functional. She didn't feel like she was doing anything, she just existing. Surprised that she woke up every morning wondering why. And months this went on, and the life coach just couldn't seem to find that one thing, to get her motivated to live again, because she had plenty of life left. And one day she showed up with a magazine rolled up, and the life coach said, "What's that magazine you have?" "Oh, it's about apes. I love gorillas. I read everything I can get my hands on about gorillas." She said, "Well, let's sit back down just for a second." She picked up a phone called the zoo. "Hey, do you have any gorillas here?" "You do? Well, you ever need volunteers every now and then with gorillas?" And they said, "Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, we have a female gorilla that's just had a baby, and we don't have a clue how or can't spend the time with her to teach her how to care for her baby." And she said, "I'm sending someone over." Long story short, she did go there, and she did help with that gorilla, and she became good at it. So good, in fact, the zoo hired her. So good, in fact, that she hired herself out to other zoos whose gorillas had babies in captivity and needed someone to teach them how to raise those babies. Do you think she found her life purpose? Oh yeah. It's about listening close enough to the universe, to a rolled up magazine, to an email, to a job offer, to an offer to speak somewhere, to these simple things that come to us. I'm asking you to be and to do, and don't worry about the having. That's the trap of this world. Having doesn't mean anything. So I have a workshop on this. It's Design the Dream Without Fear. Visualize the after event with love. Right now I'm trying to turn one of my books into a movie. And so I have a friend of mine who says, "Well, look, don't visualize yourself shooting the movie. Visualize yourself saying, and I'd like to thank my mother that you're accepting the award for that movie." Visualize the after event. Listen for the input from the universe, and that's where this meditation comes in. And remember, the golden mean will support all things, but it is a subtle force. At the end of the day, human beings can envision the smallest quanta and the birth of solar systems. The Big Bang never happened. It is our observation that slowed the universe down so we could behold it. Everything we do will eventually affect the universe, so let's do it on purpose. I'm live every Sunday and every Wednesday, 5 to 8 Pacific at xsquaredradio.com. I want you to remember that you are source. We have 2 minutes left. I want to play for you my film trailer.
Is alive and ready to give birth to a new Earth. The final battle for the souls of mankind begins. This is a story of the origin and destiny of Earth and its people. During the flood, two planets merged to form the planet upon which we live. One day they will come apart, just as the spirit leaves the body when its time of mortality is done. That day is upon us. Are you ready for the change? The awakening has already begun.
Books are available at the table right over here.